Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the first of our Parents and Carers Teenager Talks. I'm elated to welcome you all. So, we've got Jo with us. Jo Carter-Fulton has been in education for 30 years as a teacher, tutor, deputy head teacher, and as part of an advisory team for a local authority. Jo has taught right across the age range, from early years upwards, is a master in neuro-linguistic programming, coach, and master timeline therapist. Jo believes that all students are capable of a successful outcome if they have the right tools to support them. Jo creates a safe space for teens to support, raise confidence, and create a community that focuses on mental health, emotional well-being, and learning to help teens reach potential. So this is the first of a series of 6 sessions. This session is called Emotional Wellbeing, Supporting Your Teen Through Stress, Anxiety, and Mental Health Challenges. So huge welcome to Jo. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to pass over. Jo's going to do a talk, and then we're going to have a Q&A, which we will not be recording. Thanks everyone for being with us today. Really elated. Passing over to Jo.
Thank you, Christiana, and thank you for inviting me to talk in the group for these next few weeks. I really feel very honoured and privileged to have been invited to do that. I've worked with teens, like Christiana says, I've been in education for nearly 30 years, and I don't like to think of it. When I actually add it up, it actually scares me just how long it's actually been. But I have done everything from early years up to working with students in university as well as they transition from home into further education and beyond. And it's I think in the last few years, it's even more necessary than it ever has been that we support our teens as much as we possibly can. So what I did back in 2020 is I actually left the classroom, officially left the classroom, and set up the Student Mindset Academy, because I was doing a lot of tutoring as well as my teaching, and student mindset, their self-esteem and their emotional well-being was something I was sort of getting called in for a lot. And I realized that, like, we all do that for children, particularly for teens. If they're not in the right place for learning emotionally, then the actual output of their learning is going to be quite reduced. So this is why I started up my business. Also, I have 3 teens. 2 are now adults, and my middle child, he had terrible anxiety, and I know we're going to look at anxiety next time. And so I had to learn as a mum very quickly how to support him and getting him into school, because he was starting to refuse school. Now he's at university and blossoming, but it's really something that's been really close to my heart. So transitions obviously happen all the time, and they will happen at different parts of the day, different parts of the year. And I think we often think of the main transition points, like for going into year R, or when they first go to a childminder or go to a preschool, then when they go to secondary school, then when they go to college or university. So we think of those key times. But what we sometimes forget about is all the other transitions that happen during an actual day. So for some children from a very early age, they have been, their transitions getting into school in the morning will be going from home to a childminder into school, and the same on the way back. And this can be quite tricky because they can see an awful lot of change. By the time they reach teenagers, the teen years, when you've got all those hormones and puberty and everything starting to sort of take off, this can sometimes have, when I talk to teens, this is one of the things they sometimes talk about. They'll go back to, well, I always went from here to there to there. And sometimes we have to do that because as parents, we are always busy, and we're often working, and we're trying to fit everything in and keep all those plates spinning. But it's just useful for us as parents, and for me certainly as an educator, to think about what that child might have been through in terms of transition before they even arrive with me. Now, I work at the moment as a mental health lead in an alternate provision, so we have a lot of children for whom transitions are particularly tricky and around the teen years. So like I said, we've got one sort of around preschool time, nursery or childminder, that would be one of them. Then you've got year R, year 7, then you go year 12 and college, and then obviously on into adulthood as well. Now, this graphic here is one I use a lot with teens, and I know sometimes people say to me, oh, is it a bit young? It's not actually, they actually really love it, because when you're thinking about their emotional well-being and how they're feeling about it, I often use this step, and sometimes I'll talk about it rather than actually showing the graphic, but they do like graphic. So I see the idea of the tricky transition going from they won't do it, they won't go into school, they won't go into college, or they're really anxious about it, all the way up to being really proud of themselves at the end. And you'll find that children will go up and down this ladder. So you think they've got halfway up, and then you might go down a few steps, and then go up again and come down a few steps. But the idea is that we reach that top where they've done it and they feel they succeeded in whatever part of life and their education that they're actually in. So in early years, what do we see? Well, we see separation anxiety. You might see crying. They might become more cuddly as they've got a transition. This could be when mum or dad leaves them in the morning. Sometimes it can be when someone comes to pick them up in the evening as well, because they've got themselves safe. So all these sorts of things, by the way, that I'm going to talk about are things you'll see in teens as well. So I'm just trying to show you this journey here. So they might be more cuddly, they might have an upset stomach, they might not be eating quite the same, or becoming more fussy. It might be that their toileting routine goes backwards a few paces. I'm sure we've all had that, and they're not always able to regulate behaviour. And sometimes this is because they find that transition from one place to another, or one person to another, a little bit overwhelming. And when a child is very young, we actually, we're aware of that, and we're aware of separation anxiety, and we can do that sort of drip feed little bit, and then stretching that elastic as they become more secure. But when we get to teens, we sometimes forget about the fact that some teens might actually still need this. So the next one, main one, the year 7, they may have some separation anxiety. It may be that they're not with their friends. Of course, this is the start of 11, 12-year-olds where these hormones are starting and puberty starting. So they may not be quite as keen as going. You might think they're really excited, but actually when it comes to it, they're not quite so sure. So they might show some separation anxiety. Maybe they're not, maybe their friends have gone to a different school. You might see some crying, or you might see some withdrawn behaviour, maybe head down, not so sure about what they're doing. They may complain about not feeling very well. Again, you might see the same things we saw before about their diet changing. They might be a bit more fussy. They might not be eating. They may not be so up with their own self-care, and of course we link that with obviously our hormones and things, so about regulating their own behaviour as well. But at year 7 upwards, as we know, it'll be not just their physical aggression that you might see, because we know what it's like. They might storm off or slam a door or something like that. It might be things that they're saying as well, because they've got more resources, because they're a little bit older. It's important, I think, to mention that cortisol levels was actually done in a scientific experiment to take swab cheek cells from inside a case study group of teens. And when they actually swabbed it, they saw that the cortisol levels were really spiked just before an important transition event, such as going to year R or going into year 7. And cortisol and adrenaline levels can spike very, very quickly, but they can take up to 6 months to actually calm back down. So when we're thinking about key times like year R or year 7, it can take up to 6 months of a rise in cortisol to the actual event, and then another 6 months to actually calm back down again. So a child that doesn't cope very well with transition, maybe from year to year, from class to class, you might see that all year round, because it's building up, thinking about which class am I going to be in. Then you've got the summer holidays, they might be worrying about it. Then they transition to the next class and it starts to calm down before it starts again. It can feel like a little bit of a roller coaster. Okay. Then to year 10 to 13, you might have some of them going to a college or likes to be staying on for A levels. But again, you might see some children when they've got a transition moment because they are not quite sure how to deal with it. They might be isolating themselves at home or away from their friends sometimes. You might even find they're avoiding lessons or school or college in general. You know, working with some of the children I work with, coming in the morning is a big thing because it's transitioning from home, which they feel is a safe space, to somewhere where they're not feeling quite so secure. So they might have some lesson avoidance or work avoidance that comes with that. Again, they might complain about not feeling very well. Again, they might have some dietary changes. There might be small issues with self-care. Or you might find that they are particularly I don't want to use the word obsessed with, but you might find that they're actually really very, very concerned about what they look like. And this would be above and beyond what, you know, normal teenage. It would be a case of, you know, having to look, fitting for them, having to look perfect. And I work with a lot of teens who say, I can't go into school because, you know, my eyelashes aren't right, or, you know, my nails aren't right, or whatever it is. For them, that transition, that move from one to the other is a real trigger and causes a real problem. And again, that means they're not able to regulate their sort of behaviour, and they're able to tell you that back. And sometimes it might be a physical thing, but usually it's more verbal. But, you know, I'll be interested to get some feedback from all of you about how you see your teen coping with transitions. And if, obviously there'll be things that I'm skirting over very quickly now, but you'll come up with and we can have a chat about. And of course, then as they're getting older for education, working, and this could mean like Saturday jobs as well. It might be that they're getting late for college. It might be that they're overly anxious and they are isolating, withdrawing themselves because they don't like this feeling. It's like social anxiety. And again, we'll come back to anxiety next week. They might be avoiding starting work. They want to leave early because they're not coping, or they feel like they've got to prepare themselves for a transition home. You might see changes in eating habits, of course, and changes in personal care. So you can see there's a real link here from year R all the way up. And if your child has always been somebody who's found some transitions more tricky, then you may be able to track it back and say, right, what was it? What sort of, how do they actually display their anxiety about transition? It could be, like I said, during a particular day. It might be, you know, at break time or lunchtime, maybe they're not coping very well, or they feel they haven't got anybody they can talk to. So it might be that transition. A lot of children feel very safe in the classroom, but when it's a bit more open time, they find it more difficult. So we can come back to any questions you've got in a moment as well about that, if that's something that is of concern to you. This is something I use. It's not mine. It's freely available on the internet, the blog tree. But I use it a lot, and it's something you could use with your teen here. So if they're feeling particularly anxious and they're not quite sure what's going on, or they're worrying about transition, or worrying about going to school or something, this is brilliant. It's sort of self-explanatory. You can see on there that the blog character represents a particular emotion or a feeling, and they can actually write it. They can colour it in. Some people want to date it, and they can keep a track over a whole week. It's up to you. You can use it in individual sessions, but this gives a really good way of you as a parent being able to open up conversation about it. So I'll just let you have a quick look at that for a moment before I move on. But you can see there quite easily, I think, which ones would show not wanting to engage, maybe their backs turned to them. So you can see it with my cursor, this one here with the back turned. This one feeling that they've got a good friend that they can talk to, or they've made good friends. This might be, well, they're okay, but they actually feel a bit out on their own. They're not feeling that they can be happy. They may be a bit jealous of other people. This one over here, I do like this one. They feel like there's some support in place. If there's not a natural branch to help them find out, you know, how they're feeling, they've actually got somebody or something they can do to support themselves. And of course, you know, depending on the team, it can be that they can feel like they're just literally sort of face planting at the bottom down here, that they're not able to say how they're feeling, but they just want to sort of hide away. You might get one like this one on the left, where they feel like they're literally clinging on as much as they can. But it's a good one to use to be able to specify the sort of feelings around it, and a good way of opening up conversation, because teens can often find it hard to carry out sort of those sorts of conversations. Sometimes they might feel they're on the spot. We can have a chat about that in a moment, about whether it's a case of not wanting to share, or whether it's finding it difficult to actually get conversation going. So sometimes when we've got these transition issues, it can cause this sense of overwhelm. And you've got to think about, what does overwhelm look like, and ask them, to see, is it a fight, flight, freeze thing that's going on? Is it a case of, misreading body cues? Are they showing that they're overwhelmed, but it's coming out in the wrong way? So you can try reassuring them, give them permission to stop and just take a breath. You can emphasize the need to relax, and you can then break tasks and things down into bite-sized pieces so they don't feel overwhelmed. Because sometimes I think when coming into school in the morning, or into college, there's so many things they've got to plan and do at a certain time, and they can't cope with that amount of information. But then it's also about us as parents being able to reframe their thoughts and language into positive things, but also looking at some breathing exercise as well. And we can talk about some of those, if you like, in a moment as well. So the teen brain goes through a spurt, as we know, during puberty, and it's very similar to that of a toddler. So this is why you might be seeing the terrible twos type tantrum things that are going on anytime from sort of 9, 10 years old all the way up. And it's because the toddler brain is basically, and the teen brain is doing what the toddler brain was doing. It's making new connections, it's questioning, it's testing things, it's looking for validation. And this is why then it might be that they're taking more risks than they were before. They start thinking, why have they made that decision? It's because the two parts of the brain now are not talking to each other. And what I find a lot with the teens that I work with is they're actually seeking identity. This could be as simple as, am I normal? The thoughts I've got going through my head, are they normal? What is it that I actually want? And then the sort of questioning, shall I do that? Do I do that? Do I risk it? All these sorts of things. And certainly for a lot of other teens that I work with, they're working out who they are, and maybe even their gender identity or their sexual identity as well. So there's a lot going on inside the brain, but the brain isn't like fully formed, as we know, sort of early 20s. So it's still going through all these things. So particularly when they're teens and they're sort of going into college, or they're going through school and transitioning from year to year, they've got all this stuff going on as well as learning. And this is exactly why I started the business that I started, because I could see that, if they weren't really fully aware of who they are and it had all these things going on, then learning was sort of taking a bit of a downwards priority for them, because they had other stuff in their brain to work out. So how can we support them? Obviously, reassurance, staying positive, help them be organised if they're transitioning. They've got lots of transitions in the day, because obviously as teens they'll often be getting the bus to school, or maybe a train to school, like my daughter does. My daughter's a train and a bus actually, so that can be, she gets a bit anxious about that, so she finds herself when we do some breathing and things with her in the morning to help her with that, but she wants to do it. And this is the thing about teens, they want to be independent, but they don't always fully have the resources of which to help them. Keep calm yourself, like I say, they'll fake it till you make it. But also just that, I always say to them, imagine put your own oxygen mask on. And I think as parents, this is really, really important, because we have to look after ourselves so that we can role model it to our children. I often say to them, to my children, I used to say to them, starting a new job, that's a transition. And that can be, that has that sense of anticipation and excitement, but also a little bit of concern as well. Am I going to like it? Have I made the right choice? So I think by sharing our experiences with our teens, this helps them realise that we all go through it. but we just have to try and look at it in a positive way. Keeping language positive is important. Something else I always think about for teens, and this might be something you don't have to, doesn't need anything major. It can be one circle on a piece of paper with another one outside it, as it says here. And I ask them to put in the central circle things that are in your control. And this is really good with transition, because when they're transitions and they're finding it tricky, they'll often say, oh, I've got to do this, and I've got to do that, and I won't be able to find my way, or I don't like it when the teacher changes, and all these things are on. They say, I can't control it. They feel overwhelmed, which is what I was saying a couple of minutes ago. So I try and calm this down by saying, right, what can you control? And they'll go, oh, I can't control anything. But then you've got the clues here, well, you can control your own thoughts, you can control your own feelings, you can control your behavior, your ideas. And then outside, in the outside circle, writing things that are outside of their control, things they can't control. And that could be other people's words, other people's feelings. It could be the weather. It doesn't matter what it is. But then they start to see, whereas they go from a place of, I can't control everything and everything's happening to me, to actually, I have got more control than I thought I had. I hope that makes sense. We can come back to that. I'm just aware that I want to be able to use the Q&A time, so I was going to run through this fairly quickly. But this is a really good exercise, and that you will need some help to start with if they're getting really anxious, but you can guide them with that. Journaling, another really good thing. I don't know how many people here journal themselves. If you do, I agree. I think it's great. Journaling with teens is brilliant, and it's, I always say to them, it's not a diary. It's much more than that. It's a way of clearing your mind, particularly if you've got some anxiety around going in to school or college, or anticipation of an exam coming up, or going into a new year group when everything's changing. There can be transitions, of course, with friendships, and as they become teens, it could be relationships, particularly if they're in a relationship and that then stops. That's a transition. That's another time when there's a change going on that some of them might find really tricky. So journaling at the end of the evening, before they go to bed, just get the thoughts out onto paper. It clears the mind. It gives the brain a chance to relax, empty its thoughts, and be ready to problem solve in a more effective way overnight and the next day. It gets their feelings out. And I think sometimes for some of them, they will say to me, oh, I didn't really believe it until I saw it written down. And I think that we keep so many things inside us. One of the analogies I use for teens, particularly around transition and anxiety, and we'll talk about this again next week, is it's like a sink. I said, if you've got a sink and you turn the taps on and you've got the plug in, then the water is going to fill and fill and fill. And as it's getting to the top, you've got a choice to make. You either pull the plug out, or you have to turn the taps off, or both. Otherwise, it's going to spill over. And this is like us on a daily basis. Usually our rest and our sleep and our chance to get home and feel safe and secure is a way for us to pull the plug out. Doesn't matter how many taps are on, we're able to cope with it, pull the plug out, and then we can refuel for the next day. The problem is, if you have anxiety and things around transitions, particularly as a teen, and you've got all the hormones going on, that you feel you've got all these pressures. And I always see them as like little light bulbs going on about my friends, my learning, GCSEs coming up, how do I get to school, family at home. It could be anything. All these things going on, all these taps filling the sink, but they don't know how to take the plug out. So journaling is a great way of literally emptying your head, getting those ideas down, and it just helps them then clear that space. And it gives them a chance to reflect and ultimately, hopefully also have a better night's sleep, able to cope with the next day. Boosting self-esteem for teens is really important. So if they're finding things really tricky, I find, let's just think when your child was year R, I used to be year R teacher as well, and I used to see them run to mum at the end of the day, or dad, and they would be really excited, off they go, and then the next day a parent would come into me and say, well, they're not really telling me what's happened today. They're not really, they sort of shrugged their shoulders and didn't say anything. And I say, that's very normal, because they're in this new little world. As they grow into teens, becomes even more, we feel like we don't know anything about their world, do we? They seem to be glued to phones or screens and things like that. So getting them out in fresh air, doing some exercise and talking about healthy diet, drinking water are really, really important. And it just helps them also feel better in themselves, and that boosts their self-esteem, which is really important if they're finding the teens a tricky time. Again, they can write down their thoughts and feelings in a journal. And also, I think it's about, for them, sort of reframing their thoughts. How can we say that in a different way? I often find that teens will say, "You never let me," "You always," or "I never do that. Everybody else has got this. Nobody else has to do this." So they're speaking hyperbole all the time. They're exaggerating. So we try practice reframing that. Say, well, what's your evidence that it's everybody else? Because sometimes they've got this feeling, and they've got themselves really low, but they're not able to really sort of boost themselves back up. We practice also not comparing themselves to other people. Spending quality time listening to them, and actually practicing compliments as well, because I find teens find it really hard to accept a compliment. I don't know whether you've found that, because they can sometimes shy away and hide away. So just by doing all these sorts of things, boost their self-esteem, and again, it will make these moments of transition a lot easier. They can't happen all at one time. This is a journey that you need to go on, particularly if you've got a child who is 10, 11, already showing signs of that. So you need to think about how you can build this into life and into the day, in order to help them achieve and really feel like that by the time they're sort of 17, 18, going on to adulthood. I think for teens, with transition, open communication is really important, showing that you trust them, that you believe them. And sometimes that communication doesn't happen face to face. If anything like my teens, the best conversations I have with my teens are in the car, because they're not feeling that they're face to face. You're sitting side by side. This is a really good time to be having a conversation. It could be pushing a shopping trolley, it could be going for a walk, but the idea is that by moving, or the feeling of movement and not being face to face, really helps them to be able to communicate how they're feeling. It's a bit like when they were very little, the toddlers, and then you say, "Have you had a good day?" And then they say yes, and then by the time they put in the bath, something, or reading a story, something will come up that hasn't really gone well for them that day. So all these things are really important particularly for teens, particularly if they're not communicating, and if they're worried about transitions. It could be transition to adulthood even. It doesn't matter what the transition for them is. They will find it hard to communicate that. So opening up those channels is really important. You discuss what they're good at, encourage chatting to their friends. They do tend to do that. And I think that whether we think the mobile phone is a good thing or not, I know actual physical talking is really, really important. Having someone they can talk to, even if it's on a text, is a really good thing. And sometimes I know that my children will say something on a text that they feel they can't say actually in person. So that can be quite handy as well. But it's important that we role model that positive talk. And we role model our reactions to situations as well. And of course, if there's something that you need to be concerned about, at least you can have those open discussions. So why is that important? Because it trains the mind to think about the things we can control, what we can't control. It helps rationalize, it helps communication, it helps all these things, so that hopefully transitions from one stage of life to another become easier. So what do we need to do? We need to recognize and validate the feelings that they have. You know, that's okay. Teens will often say to me, I shouldn't be thinking this. I don't want to go to that lesson, or I don't want to go to the next year because I like this teacher and I feel safe with that teacher. And it's important that we recognize and validate those thoughts and feelings and tell them it's, you know, it's okay to be feeling like that. This is very natural to be feeling like that. And then we have to role model that self-care for ourselves, the self-talk and strategies that we use. My daughter had an incident just this week, actually, and she was very concerned about how she was going to speak to a teacher at her school. And we talked it through, and I didn't give advice, like direct advice, because I know that doesn't work for her. But I was saying, well, I wonder what I think I had a time like that when I was younger, and I said that this is something that worked for me. And then she came back to me yesterday and say, oh, I did listen to what you said, Mum, and it did actually work. So I think us role modeling it and showing that we've been in a similar situation can be very important. I think also, you know, it's about helping with that breathing, particularly if they're really anxious. And we'll find out on the chat in a moment whether it's something they just get concerned about, or whether it is so overwhelming that it's actually almost debilitating and stops them from accessing school at all. But you can do the breathing muscle, so tighten the muscles, let them go, just to remind them of relaxation, because that's when they get a moment of anxiety, it can be overwhelming. It can actually stop them from doing anything. And then grounding technique as well, which we'll look at a bit more next week, about using our senses to help us. Keep talking, stay patient, because they pick up on our body language all the time. And then I always say to them, find someone that you can talk to, whether it's a school, a college, whether it's a friend, or whether it's a family member. Find someone that you can talk to, that you really feel you can share those things with. So I'll stop sharing there, and I want to go to the chat and just see what's come up, or let's open up conversations. Anybody got any questions? We won't put anything in there at all.
I'm going to thank you so much, Jo. That was incredible. I'm gonna stop recording and then we'll start chatting. Thank you, everybody.